There we go. Okay, so I'm going to pull up a presentation and we will kind of walk through. I don't know what cadence we're going to have these town halls on, but I figure we may as well start out with a little bit of structure, and then we can decide if this works and decide how frequently we want to have them this way versus different formats, more or less formal. So let's see if I can figure out how to share the whole tab. Go. All right. So as usual, the first question is always, is the slide legible? Is the text big enough for everyone? Is that good to see?
Looks great.
Okay. So this is our first or 0th meeting, depending on how you want to count. The slides will be posted on the website and on GitHub with the URL once it's done and available. And our agenda today, which doesn't have to be our agenda, obviously, first contact with reality typically changes these things, but this is our tentative agenda, stuff that we wanted to cover, assuming we stick to the script. So a little bit intro, context. Obviously, there's an elephant in the room we'll address. Then an overview for those who aren't as familiar with what SOLI is today. Discussion of some of the things we've done in the last week or two since announcing. And then I think the juiciest bits towards the end, where we'll talk about things that we all want to do, to change, to add, and how we might kind of address those together. So a little bit of welcome and intro. This is SOLI. I have a feeling this isn't really necessary because everybody who's here knows about SOLI through either prior kind of interactions or through friends and referrals. Damien and I are probably the people you most associate with SOLI-like stuff. The team from a SOLI perspective is essentially us today. And that's something we want to kind of discuss, to put on the table, to figure out who else might want to be more involved from the perspective of kind of like really being a part of this thing, and for all of the fun and all of the kind of more administrative tasks. And it's going to be an open thing that we figure out together. So as of today, really, I'm the one kind of leading the SOLI administrative stuff right now. Damien is obviously helping and has been a part of this forever in some sense, and will be figuring this out as we get kicked off and other people get interested. Damien, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I've heard people pronounce it SOLI, but it is actually SOLI. I think solo is one solo, many solos together. The plural of solo is SOLI. So just a pronunciation factor. This is SOLI.
Always the musician, right? That'll be, I think, the extent of it. No music theory discussion, but
Yeah.
We do have a couple people on the call, I think, who probably would like that. So, okay. So I think the elephant in the room, which we'll try to be brief about here, is what is SOLI and why has it been created? The gist of it is that obviously there have been ontologies or taxonomies or projects before, like the SALI Alliance. Some of those projects have been open to various degrees. The SALI Alliance, for example, is a 501c6. There's a lot of things that go into governance projects generally, whether or not they're nonprofits, but there have been some things that I think we don't necessarily feel like went quite the right way. Some of those things are kind of public knowledge and very clear. Like if you went and looked at the Delaware site, the Delaware State Corporate Registry, you might see that the SALI organization was not in good standing and did not file paperwork for almost 5 years. So kind of facts on the record like that suggest tip of the iceberg to some degree. And again, we don't really want to spend our time here today talking about that. But what we want to do going forward is focus on the things that I think an ideal open collaborative project would do, which is doing it within kind of proper governance, open governance in a 501c3, and trying to do things the right way. generally, I think is what we would emphasize. So I don't know, Damien, if you'd like to add anything on that topic.
One augmenting of what Mike said, that if anyone wants to see the email from the Delaware Secretary of State's office with a PDF saying that the last time that Sally filed an annual report with the Secretary of State's office was 2020, I'm happy to send that PDF to whomever would like to see it. So that is one of the questions I have for Sally, the organization. I have many other questions that remain unanswered, and mostly I would like to get answers to those questions to help me trust the organization again. Sally, the organization is one thing. Sally, the standard is a very separate thing. I love the Sally standard perhaps more than anyone else in the world. I've donated literally, I was trying to calculate it, maybe 4,000 hours of my life. I donated $0 charge, pure donation of nights, weekends, vacations. I spent my entire vacation this last year building up Sally and building up taxonomical items. So the standard I love probably more than anybody in the world. The organization, I have real questions about the organization and its governance. So until I can become comfortable with Sally, the organization, I'm going to put many, many efforts into SOLI and to be able to build up SOLI. Of course, you could imagine that maybe SOLI items go into Sally eventually. And of course, congruence is something that we're looking to have. But really, the governance side really needs to be cleaned up and questions need to be answered before I'm comfortable with Sally again.
So I don't know if you feel like we should do question and answer on that topic now to address anything that might be outstanding so we can focus on some of the more technical stuff. What do you think, Damien? Should we open up kind of?
I think that's a good idea.
Right. So I'm going to switch so I can see everyone's faces. Does anyone want to ask questions? Is that enough information? I know other people on this call have either had their own kind of questions, concerns, or other topics independently addressed.
I guess one other thing before questions, I want to say that this distinction between the organization and the standard should be very distinct. Because Sally, the standard, is going blazes. I get many emails every week. People are adopting it left and right. I was greetings from Las Vegas, where I just was at the Running Legal Like a Business in-house corporate council. And tons of corporate people are adopting the standard. The standard is alive. The standard is well. The standard is being utilized. So I don't want the standard to be sullied by the organization. So rest assured that the standard itself is alive and well and is flourishing.
Yeah. This is why it's so important that we actually have good governance and keep up velocity and are responsive to kind of what people want and what people need in the standard, right? This is the very moment when adoption is actually accelerating. So it's critical that we do the right things and actually help people adopt and kind of listen and react to what's out there.
One other aspect of this is that the Sally standard on GitHub, the LMSS standard, has been, since it came into GitHub, always been MIT licensed. So MIT license, you can go ahead and fork that taxonomy. And so, of course, that is something that we have done with SOLI. And this is, we made sure to ensure that all legal I's are dotted and T's are crossed for the licensing side. And one other thing too is that a condition of Mike contributing the massive amounts that he did to the Sally LMSS standard, a condition, of course, was making it MIT licensed so that that it can remain free and open in the most open sense.
Yep. Did you mean to put your hand down? As the person who's been working on ontologies probably the longest out of anyone on the call, I feel like you obviously should have the honor of the first question.
You're talking to me?
Yeah, I am. I think you have the honor of the most experienced ontologist in the room.
Well, I actually raised my hand because I wanted to ask the question that Damien just answered, namely about whether the Sally standard was essentially in the public domain. And I guess the answer is yes, because of the license, the MIT license you have. Does that mean, just following that up then, does that mean that a good starting point for this organization would be just to take that public domain ontology and incorporate it, start with it, Is that something you're thinking of? And in other words, the standard seems, you just said the standard is separate, distinct from the organization and the governance, and I don't know the details of the governance problems. I didn't know anything about that until what you just said a few minutes ago. But does that mean that this whole project SOLI is designed to take the SOLI standard and put it in a different governance structure? Is that the way you're thinking about this?
I think that is the minimum vision or mission at this point of the SOLI project, is minimally to provide, let's say, not just safe harbor, but also the governance that the standard as an ontology as it exists today deserves, given the market adoption. But I think as your kind of questions and other fora evidence, there's so many other things that we've all wanted to do. And part of the issue is that those of us in particular, I think, who have held the pen the most on the standard and who've donated the most time, like Damien, have been somewhat concerned about some of the larger projects to bite off unless and until we felt comfortable about some of the other issues, which, to the extent that this is now housed in a 501c3 and we have direct and open visibility into the governance, and we want to kind of reset the standards with the community in a way that really promotes open collaboration, it is not just to continue the prior OWL file with a new name, right? If we took, for example, like I think we'll get to hopefully in a couple minutes, if we took the existing LMSS standard and SOLI kind of continued in part as a backwards compatible OWL file that some people could continue to use in its traditional form, but we also were able to project that same information with compatible IRIs or entities into other representations, other forms, to use it in more kind of like computable projects. Like I know you've obviously been researching for many decades now. That would obviously be wonderful. And there's absolutely no reason that we can't do that today with confidence to invest in a project that we all believe in from a sustainable governance perspective. Does that sufficiently answer your question?
And to build upon what Mike said, if you've seen Sally's translations into 10 different languages, that's all Mike Bomarito. He was able to do that. Mike did that, I think, 9 months ago, if I remember correctly. So all the things that have been added to Sally since then don't yet have translations. So you can imagine that that's maybe one of the many, many SOLI tasks, is to add translations into the different languages, to make different translatable forms. Do you want it in JSON? Do you want it in different formats? So yeah, so many, many things we can do.
Yes, no, that answered my questions, certainly.
Okay. Were there any other questions on kind of the governance topic?
I haven't got one for the governance topic, but I guess it's more for like change management for my day-to-day job.
Yep.
Or I guess I'll put it onto VLEX terms rather than iManage terms. Will you be tracking changes on both of them at VLEX? Or will you just be following SOLI? I'm just trying to work out for our own like sort of internal data layer, which one am I keeping my eyes on?
The beauty, and so I of course wear two hats for those who don't know. I have my VLEX hat, my day job, and then my non-profit-y job that I volunteer for taxonomies. Sally, of course, in the past and present, and then SOLI in the present. So with my VLEX hat on, VLEX, I've not gotten corporate consent for this, so I'm speaking as Damien Real individual rather than Damien Real as representative of VLEX. But I would imagine that VLEX is very adoptive of standards, however those standards come along. And one can imagine there's a mapping between the SALI standard and the SOLI standard that is very congruous. So whether we ultimately use the identifier for one or the other, I think is kind of immaterial, because we'll be able to accommodate both.
Yeah. As of today, the IRIs are identical. The API is compatible. The new SOLI Python library we'll look at in a few minutes, which is MIT licensed and available, will transparently map between the legacy IRIs and the go forward IRIs. And we unlike, well, obviously the old API, I think, Damien, do we even know what LMSS version that LMSS API was running on?
So the API, there's the API that Thomson Reuters contributed to have a standardized way to be able to do an API call and a standardized way to do an API payload. That was agnostic as to version of LMSS. That just relies on the IRI, the SALI IRI to be
I meant the one, if you just click the IRI as a hyperlink, that one is not up to date, right?
That's correct. Yeah, I think that is months out of date.
Yeah. So one of the things we're trying to do, Sam, is like all the things that production use obviously requires, like having versioned endpoints or the ability to request versioning and to track changes at the, let's say the, like, just to pick a word, like to have versioning at the RDF element level is what I think we all ideally want from a enterprise production use. Those are things that we're doing in the software on the SOLI side going forward. Is if you want to pick a version of, or at the class level, for example, to talk OWL, you can request at the version level or the Git snapshot level the OWL class and be able to retrieve point in time through the API. So there's a lot of this stuff. It's not that hard. It would have been nice if it had been done in the past, but we're not going to kind of look back or think about excuses people have had. We're just going to build it and make it available, and people can use it, and it's going to be free and open, and you're welcome to help and PR too. But we're just going to get some stuff done because it's time for the world to adopt a standard like this, and it's just going to be what we do.
And
So,
nobody builds faster than Mike Bomarito. This man is a machine, and so you're going to see lots of fast and great things coming out of SOLI. So I wonder, Mike, since we're 20 minutes in, does it make sense to be able to show some of the stuff you've built?
sure. So I think everybody probably knows what SOLI either is from a legacy perspective or what it could be. So I won't do that. An introduction to taxonomies and ontologies. I'll focus on kind of the current state. So obviously we started, as we just alluded, by forking the LMSS standard, because that is the thing that is most adopted today in its present form. And we've started by taking the standard and building out some of the tooling that either had been in some form under the LMSS standard, or that we wanted to have and that had not yet been built. So a couple things are a basic Python library, MIT license. This is similar to a prior library that I had contributed as well, but this one has backwards compatibility for IRIs. It's maintained now under this new 501c3. So it'll be straightforward for anybody who's used a prior version of the Python library to use, and it will be actively maintained. It has search. You can search by RI namespaces. You can traverse on triples or taxonomies, a bunch of the basic stuff that you need to do when you work with the taxonomy or the ontology kind of dimensions of SOLI today. Obviously, the kind of what is SOLI in the singular or plural form, and whether it ought to be more like a proper taxonomy or a proper ontology or neither or both at the same time, is the kind of stuff that we can talk about. And it doesn't, and the beauty of this is it doesn't really have to be a single answer if we're sufficiently resourced. And we are now sufficiently resourced in this 501c3 to do this. So I think it's different kind of set of choices. So anyway, this Python library should be very straightforward to use. There are documentation pages for it, and it's all available on GitHub. So I don't know if anybody has used the prior Python libraries or used any of the, or had to build their own API or library, but that shouldn't be a gating issue today for any teams that have Python support. One of the things that we wanted to put on the table was what other languages would people want a native library in? C#, Java, anything like that. It's not hard, obviously, to maintain second or third client library. So if there's sufficient interest, we'd be happy to put out another native library. So welcome to throw your requests in the comment box there, or send emails, or put an issue on GitHub, and we can look at that. The next thing that we have built and released already is a new API. This API is, as you would expect, an open API. It has a spec, it's fully typed, and unlike the prior APIs, it also provides a number of convenience functions. So there's a kind of an HTML UI that's just delivered directly from the open API endpoints. You can view all of the OWL classes with all of the data there. I'll show you that in a second. And many of the things that I think people have had to do when working with the ontology or taxonomy in the past are kind of basic, boring, but they create frictions and they slow things down, like just converting back and forth between different formats. Not really fun, gets in the way of things, right? Some systems speak XML, some speak JSON LD, sometimes you just want to look at it in Markdown to put it on the screen. We've made that all seamless in this public API. One other thing is, let me emphasize this here, if you're building a front-end app, which I know a lot of people do, or POCs, or kind of public interest projects and hackathons, this CORS issue, I believe, was an issue with the prior API because you couldn't make a request across from the front end in the browser. This is an open CORS origin API, so you can just implement a front end anywhere and make a query kind of in JavaScript on the front end, and don't have to worry about hosting your own API or dealing with any of the rest of that. So it should be much easier to work with. It's all containerized and supports HTTPS. So some of you obviously work at organizations where you might want to deploy your own internal API endpoints for scalability, for internal security purposes, whatever. This should check the box on that from a HTTPS native containerized perspective too. So hopefully that helps. As usual, you could just browse the docs page. So let me switch here. So this is the live API endpoint. I will load one of the classes. So this is Denmark. There is a search bar. I know that was one of the features that was most requested on the old website. It never got implemented, but there is a search bar that's built in now to the HTML preview on the API. And so we talked about, right, you can just click this and you'll get any of the other formats. There is also a very basic graph visualization widget at the bottom of this. It only really represents a subset of what is in the OWL file. Obviously, the graph is quite large, so displaying the entire thing, rendering on the front end, can be dangerous if you hit the wrong node. We did constrain this so that it only shows neighbors and only shows a subset of edge types. But all of this is there, free, publicly available right now, so people can just use it. And we're going to be adding more features to this. We wanted to kind of get a first version out the door right away and then solicit feedback and hear what people might want. But our perspective is this kind of functionality or anything else that you think you need to adopt, we want to provide in this API. We want to make it easy for you to consume in this API, and we don't want any of the frictions that we can easily take away to get in the way of you adopting the standard.
And Micah, if you could go back to the SCOTUS, the search
Sure.
that you showed earlier, this being able to search for maritime negligence. So here you can see maritime lien, maritime negligence. This kind of publicly consumable search is something that I've wanted to implement in SALI for, since about 2021. It has not been implemented in SALI since 2021. Mike Bomarito on this call implemented it in a day, less than a day, a few hours. So this is the kind of rapid development that you're going to see with SOLI that I've been wanting for years, and Mike builds and Mike ships. Oh, and by the way, that kind of search capability is something I've heard from many law firms, many vendors, many corporate clients that all want to use SALI and want it in a consumable way. All historically, I've sent them to Web Protege, which requires a username and login, which is a friction point. And then also, as not, if you search for any taxonomical item, it only works on the RDFS label. It didn't work on any of the synonyms or the other aspects of it. So all of this, what Michael just searched, is now able to do all those things in a much better, smarter way.
Yep, and that was a great recommendation too, Jesse. We in was it February of last year, Damien? We had released a kind of batch LLM-based search approach. We are working on a more kind of modern and more expansive set of tools to do not just classification, but also annotation. So in addition to kind of a RAG sentence embedding, right? There's a lot of different ways you can do this stuff, but we're planning to roll out an annotative tool where you can upload or post text and get back not just the classification of which tags may be in there, but also the spans with the tags for each span as part of the API. So love to take a look at that and work on that with you. But I think our goal is to give people a whole menu of different options to choose from here. Okay, Damien can spend all day just showing people all of the years of work he's put into to making all of these shine, but I'm going to switch back to the presentation here so we can stay slightly on track. The API, let's see, I mentioned already has JSON LD and a number of other formats you probably want to use. We went through a bunch of this. There's also a data generator library that we just released today. One of the things that has obviously changed since the beginning of SOLI, LMSS, SALI, right, to now is AI, whatever you want to call it, is much different than it was 4 years ago. Many people are using these models to generate data, to produce synthetic data, to train other models. And one of the things that the standard or an ontology does is allow you to generate much better, more realistic data. You can do that procedurally too, right? I mean, for 50 years, we've been able to generate procedural stories using just probability or state machines. So there's nothing that really requires a generative model to do this. But generative models obviously can do some things or are easier to use in many ways than building out what would traditionally have been used to do procedural text generation. But whatever you want to do, right? Whether you want to do kind of old-fashioned mail merge style templates, or whether you want to do LLM-based text generation, we do now have a library that makes that easy. So if you wanted to, for example, generate a realistic email with company names or areas of law, you can do that. And if you wanted to use that kind of background information to generate text from an LLM, you can do that as well. And I think you get the sense from it here. The documentation is available, and I'm not going to go line by line through this, right? But it is meant to make it really easy for teams to generate a lot of high quality synthetic data with or without an LLM to support a wide range of other tasks. So there's more to come on that. That's obviously part of how we're building the annotation models that we're going to be making available. Is generating a large amount of synthetic data that we can review and kind of ensures high quality and then use to train a classifier or a span annotating model. But anybody else can do it too, right? These are tools that are openly available for anyone for any purpose, and I hope they're useful.
And can we go back to that one? Can we reflect for a moment how awesome this is? The fact that Mike Bomarito has now open sourced this, I hear so many times, I need synthetic data. This is now a way to be able to use all the taxonomy, ontological items, and be able to create this and create it for this whole list. You could be to take all the areas of law, take all the industries, take all of the services that lawyers provide, and you can mix and match those to create synthetic data with what Mike just generated.
Sometimes they're really weird. I will say there was one about bite mark evidentiary collection procedures for retail stores in like some specific jurisdiction. But the reality is, if you look through Pacer, for example, or if you've ever been a litigator, you know that most things at the end of the day end up being really weird when you get into the day-to-day practice. So
that's right. So one, it can generate all sorts of good synthetic data. Number two, Mike, maybe you want to talk a little bit about CLEM. The fact that for those who don't know about CLEM, you have a foundational model like GPT-4 that's trained on some of the grossest parts of the internet versus CLEM, which is based on cases, trained on cases, statutes, regulations. The entire .gov website, Mike has created CLEM under his 273 for-profit arm. But now 273 has donated this to the 501c3 nonprofit ALEA. And now, as of yesterday, this is all free, all open source. This is a huge contribution to humanity, that he's ingested all the cases, statutes, and regulations, the entire .gov, and now this is a foundational model based on the law that is now free and open source. Mike, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
I wanted to stay focused on SOLI, but I guess briefly, because it will probably come up. Part of what we're going to be doing with SOLI in kind of combination with the assets that Damien just mentioned that we've contributed to this 501c3 is we want to go through all these different things, right? So we have a huge amount of Pacer. We have, as Damien alluded to, like just about every digital document produced by the federal government or a number of state governments over the last, I don't know, couple decades. We've OCR'd hundreds of thousands of documents that predated digitization from the federal government. We have a number of other global jurisdictions where the data is clean from a licensing perspective under various kind of dimensions. And our goal is to, one, expand SOLI so that it can, probably in a modular way, as we'll hopefully talk about here, cover some of the things that it has not yet covered, like jurisdictions where we don't have as much experience. And all of these documents will be tagged by the time we're done with our taxonomy or ontology or whatever we want to call it, and whatever form it ends up taking as we do this. So, for example, the basic things you might think of if you think of a legal data pack like we have here would be like the United States Code, the Code of Federal Register, federal regulations, all the kind of regulatory agency work product that's created by all the agencies over the years. Every one of those documents today is not tagged by default, right? Whether it's a statutory material, regulatory material, a random, as I always love to talk about, like the USDA's bilingual guide to turducken safety from a Thanksgiving about 10 years ago. None of these documents are searchable today. They're not tagged, let alone annotated at the span level. And hopefully, before this is all done, these documents, which I think should be a more useful public good, but unfortunately are kind of locked up in legacy systems, will be tagged, will be usable by all of us, commercially or not commercially, right? To get more done with, or just to make the law more accessible, which is kind of like, if we're going to spend all this time and money making all these laws and rules, shouldn't we at least be able to find the damn things? It's kind of my perspective on it all. So hopefully before this is all said and done, that will be accomplished. And so this thing that we did, donating all these assets into this 501, is related to SOLI, because we want all of these things to be connected. We don't just want to release a bunch of data or train a model that just spits out random stuff like a stochastic parrot. We want a taxonomy and an ontology that's married to the actual laws and rules that hopefully is a part of an ecosystem with a model that is useful and reliable and open in the true sense of it. So that was a lot of words. Does anybody else want to ask a question, or Damien, do you want to add anything?
I think beautifully said.
There's a lot of work to do, but it is an exciting thing to work on. So.
Well, I guess one other thing. So Mike mentioned you could use it either as a for-profit or a nonprofit. Some people on this call might know that I'm working with the bar associations for many states on their access to justice issues. 92% of legal needs in the United States are unmet because we lawyers are too expensive. So the Minnesota Bar is appointing me chair of a working group overseeing an AI sandbox, where that AI sandbox is focused on if you are an organization helping poor people access justice with a large language model, you won't be prosecuted for the unauthorized practice of law. So one could imagine for these access to justice initiatives, using what Mike has built, using Clem, using SOLI, using all of these ways to be able to help that poor person with their landlord-tenant dispute, or help with their immigration issue programmatically, and to be able to tag up all the spans of all the laws that relate to that poor person so that they can be helped programmatically. So this is a donation to humanity to help access to justice, to help the court system. Everyone who is a litigator knows that plaintiff spots are going to be going against defense spots, which is going to overwhelm the courts. The courts will need ways to be able to work through all of that caseload. SOLI might be a way to be able to help that. So I would say that we are thinking very big as far as the things that SOLI can help for humanity. And I think that the time has come for us to help the poorest of the poor access justice.
Michael, I'll answer your questions. Maybe we can have a one-on-one later, and the recording will be available, but we'll get back to that. So small, discrete mission, right? But a worthy one for us to pursue. This is probably the fun part, right? Where we get into some of the things that I know we've all, many of us have discussed before. Like Michael, just, was it yesterday? You were messaging me about the multiple parentage and how would you go about not having multiple parentage if you wanted. We do have a forum, by the way. I don't know if you're all aware, but there is a discourse forum, not Discord, but discourse, which is just kind of a old-fashioned message board where you can look at news or post questions or ask for support and help. And we were discussing whether the ontology is an ontology, whether the ontology should be a taxonomy, whether the taxonomy should be more like should look at some of the work of people on the call who've done a lot of...
You cut out there for about 10, 15 seconds. So we were saying, should it be a taxonomy, should it be an ontology, and then you cut out.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Better now? Okay. So there's a lot of these questions that I don't think they have a single answer, right? There's a lot of different use cases. And ideally, especially in 2024, with the tools that we have and the sustainable project with kind of support and governance that we're all bought into, there's no reason that we actually have to make this a mutually exclusive thing. So if we are kind of careful or creative about the way we do this, I think we really can have everything. We can have simple CSV lists for people who just want a list of something. We can have rich taxonomies with single or multiple parentage for people who want that kind of thing. And for people who want like the dream of fully computable rules and constraints and obligations and all this kind of positive or negative theory or Hofeldian calculus stuff, right? Like we should also be able to do that because, I mean, it's all possible. It's just a matter of, I think, working together and agreeing on at least a couple things to try out. So I don't know the right format for this part of the discussion. I know a lot of you have ideas. We've talked about some of the ideas. I think we've done a lot more talking, unfortunately, thus far than we've done doing in the context of SALI/SOLI. But I wanted to start SOLI out with some momentum or velocity or with some actual kind of experimentation. So I have ideas, but I don't want this to just be my ideas. What do people on the call think would be useful projects to start to think about for the future of SOLI in the plural sense, where we share all of these IRIs and unique identifiers? But if somebody wants a list of courts in Michigan, or if they want a taxonomy of courts in England, or if they want an ontology that really has all of the kind of depth of everything, all three of those things are in one place and we share kind of the cost of maintaining the truth. Because at the end of the day, that's really what we're trying to record, right? Is on the core of it, there is some degree of truth, and it should be accessible for these things being all of the systems and institutions we rely on to work well. Okay, let me shut up. I want to hear other people have ideas about things that we can do together.
I'll talk a little bit more about what we were talking about yesterday, Michael. I think it's a relevant use case. Hi, everybody. My name is Michael Sander. I'm the founder of LexPipe. What we're trying to do is pull down documents from court systems to help pricing departments at law firms and for litigation pricing. And one of the things that we have to do is look at a complaint and identify the litigation claims that are in the complaint. All right, it's a pretty straightforward task, and actually, you have to do it. Pricing departments have to do it. Marketing departments have to do it. The attorneys themselves have to do it. Everybody has to look at a complaint and figure out what the claims are. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is just simply take an OCR complaint and then have some method of saying, okay, here are the claims of that complaint. And there are a lot of ways of writing, patent infringement, and you can use, and there's a lot of ways of kind of slicing and dicing it, direct or indirect infringement. And so having a ontology and or high taxonomy, that's kind of where we can more easily have a one-to-one mapping between complaint and like list of litigation claims is kind of one of our major goals. And I think it's kind of a broadly applicable one. So yeah, I guess it's something that SOLI could add is making that process a lot easier, which I think it's already doing.
We talked about this a little bit, right? Like in the way that SOLI inherits from the LMSS standard, there's multiple parentage without like a preferred parentage, to borrow like a SCA style thinking. And so one thing we could imagine is ensuring that all of the taxonomic modules in the standard do have some kind of resolution to a single parentage if you really need it, where you express a preferred parent versus alternative parents. But I mean, obviously this is a kind of thing that I'm sure there's other ways to do it, and I'm curious what other people think.
And to build on what Michael asked about, probably worth mentioning that Mike Bomarito, Enrico Schipole, and then John Scutato of Latham Watkins, and I are what I'm calling the extraction Avengers, where you input any text, whether that text be a complaint, like Michael said, whether that be a contract, whether that be a time entry, any text as an input, and then as an output, you get tagged and spanned annotated outputs. So one could imagine that everything that Michael said, direct infringement is a ontological tag. Indirect infringement is an ontological tag. So imagine just uploading the entire complaint and getting a well-structured, well-tagged data on the back end along with spans. That is something that the Extraction Avengers are working on right now. We have a POC that I think is going to be finished by the end of the day and is going to be better as we go forward. So what Michael asked for, I think, is well on its way, and it's just going to get better over time.
What are the other pain points that people have with kind of LMSS, to be direct from a historical perspective, right? I mean, what are the things that have been headaches? I see Dennis, you raised your hand in the system. Warren, I don't know if that was you also raising your hand. I don't know if we have a referee here who threw the flag to know which happened first.
Warren, you can go first.
Okay, yeah, I was trying to raise my hand. I'm not entirely sure how to do it here. Oh, I see it there. Anyway, we deal with contracts, so type of contract, but also things within contracts. And so we've been keeping a really close eye on that part of SOLI for quite some time now, but it hasn't coalesced. I think the issue being that there's a sort of a data dump of stuff from 4 or 5 vendors, and I sort of suspect one of those vendors has had uncontrolled taxonomies going on in their system, so that they have. So one of the problems is we'll go and look and say, I'll say like there's 3 classes, and they all mean the same thing. Like they all mean the same thing, and they're not coordinated anyway. So it's not just 3 separate classes, and not like this is the same as that. And then there's a lot of complexity once you get past the what kinds of clauses or what kinds of things are going on in this particular piece of text. So I would love to see something dealt with that, because fundamentally, before we can build our system to coordinate with a standard, it has to have that kind of diligence to the structure, right? And just in terms of, so one of the things we found is that there's no such thing as like a name of a clause. Like, that's not really how contracts are built. There's a lot of software that's sort of designed on that way. Like, okay, we'll have a bunch of contracts and we're going to have, this is this clause, and then this is this clause, and then this is this clause. But contracts don't really work that way. Like, that's just like fundamentally not how they're built. And that sort of model only really works for very, very simple contracts or very particular use cases. And as soon as you get into the real world, you start to have real serious problems with it. So, something that has a little bit more flexibility and depth to it. Yeah, I would love to see the standard move forward on the contract side.
Yeah, and one of the things, I guess, quickly before we go to Dennis, and then I know we had another hand raised there, is I think it would benefit us to kind of like think about and look at some of the, I don't want to get too academic, right, but academic models of what a contract is and how to express contracts. I know there's some people on this call who've spent a lot of time on those ideas. So looking at real work that's been done for a long time about kind of theories of contracts and making sure that we're thinking through some of those things before we just start listing stuff, I think would help, right? So we can obviously have both and continue to have a number of different kind of projections of this data. But yes, like, is a contract a bundle of kind of like genetic style clauses that all get mixed and matched together? Is it a matrix of obligations and rights in some kind of atomic sense? I don't know. There's different theories of it, right? But we should at least probably think about what we're signing up for before we just start writing stuff down and shipping it.
That's right. And I would also add that to Warren's earlier comment about there may be 3 classes that all mean the same thing. Is a force majeure clause the same as an act of God clause? Probably. So one could imagine.
No, they're not.
Oh, maybe not then. So I guess that's for our group to decide, right?
No. I mean, I could tell you, having dealt with that, and we get into the weeds with force majeure clauses and what they have, and they're not the same thing. So, like, one of the things we end up doing is sometimes with these things, you end up going and you just start looking it up, and because you have exactly that question. What's the difference if somebody just says force majeure versus act of God? And it turns out that act of God has a very specific meaning, but force majeure clauses have a bunch of other things in them too.
Cool.
And
so that's it. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I think has been a friction that I will express here, and then I want to make time for everybody else too, right, is the process of kind of getting all of the feedback and then resolving it and almost voting has been difficult in Web Protege in the past, in part because Web Protege is somewhat closed, in part because Web Protege is not really actively maintained. It's never designed for this kind of like put something to a vote, maybe in certain cases. That is one of the things that we want to work on, is to be able to, when something is subjective, and obviously some things just aren't subjective, but when something is subjective and it's a matter of like, what is the preferred label among 3 synonyms, we ought to have an easier way to just say, okay, everybody who wants to vote on what the preferred label should be, sure, let's do it, and then be done with it instead of trying to parse through 15 comments behind the Web Protege login wall. So we will be working on that and hopefully have some more information about a solution for that in the near future. Okay.
One other aspect is that the taxonomy ontologies had deontic specifications for many years now. Is there a right? Is there an obligation? Is there a penalty? Is there a violation? Each of those has already been in the taxonomy ontology for a long time. So a lot of that, I think, goes to what Warren was talking about. There are lots of things that are already part of the taxonomy ontology, and Mike's tooling can maybe be able to extract that somebody has an obligation to someone else and hear what happens if you violate that obligation.
Got to get the buzzword bingo, right? I got deontic, I got Hofeld earlier. There's a handful of these. Okay, Dennis, your turn. I'll try to keep us on track because we only have a couple minutes on the official time.
So it's super quick. Just as you were asking, Michael, about what we'd like to see, I did a lot of work, well, not lots, nowhere near Damien levels, but a bit of work with Sally on the industry code side. We're working with lots of clients, labeling clients with Sally industry codes, and that led into a lot of requests to start using Sally, like area of law, service labels on matters. And so what you guys built with the LMSS search tool is great. And if you could keep developing that, so it's, API access and it's good, that there's a huge demand for that for sure. We'd love to use anything that you're developing in that area.
Okay, that is what I was alluding to, and we talked about with Jesse about 15 or 20 minutes ago, bringing some of that LMSS search API stuff up to date. That is, I think, 17 months old now in terms of kind of the patterns that we built that on. So there's a lot of other stuff that we can do today. 17 months is not a long time, but also a very long time the way technology has been moving lately. So we will have more on that. As of today, I think the old API should still work for you, hopefully.
Okay.
We haven't taken that down, but there will be a new one and it will have more functionality going forward. So heard loud and clear, and not starting from scratch on that one either. Okay, we had another hand that I saw raised.
It was quickly me. I just wanted to reiterate the doing a taxonomy on it and making it not so polyhierarchical would probably be really important from our side. But just to back up what Warren's saying, that taxonomy, especially in sort of contracts and document classes, will probably need like a bit of work. I'm happy to work with you guys on that, just because there is quite a lot of reliance on polyhierarchy there. And so you're going to have to move it around on structure in order to sort of make that make sense for the users.
Yeah, and it's like these.
I agree. I'm just, when you have something that's 5 levels deep, like in any UI, it's impossible to display that.
And there's a huge information architecture sort of UX piece that will probably need to get going on this to really sort of help adoption. And I'm super up for helping on that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I would really like. Obviously, Damien and I just love to get in there and do stuff in the XML or rip out Python code or APIs and stuff. But I do think a little bit of slowing down and thinking about, like, here's the 5 UX patterns. Here's the 3 kind of AI, Gen AI use cases, right? Putting those out there as kind of model use cases that we think through when we talk about the stuff we do. And obviously, like, maybe the SCOS version with single parentage that we produce satisfies 3 of those UX patterns. And maybe there's a more complex version that's computable that can be used with knowledge graph reasoning in a Gen AI use case, right? So like getting those all out there and at least knowing these are the 7 use cases we support and this version addresses 3 or 2 or whatever, I think would really help us be consistent, get more done, get more adoption. So yeah, I love that.
I do a bit of work with NOS Legal as well. Yeah. And we're doing a sort of workshop on just sort of what are the core sort of fields you need for knowledge management. And we're getting loads of law firms together just to sort of like try and work out where the stability is there across those law firms. And something like that, there's no point in us creating another standard. We might as well all work together. So
we're talking with Graham, who is busy barbecuing in one of the last nice days before fall really hits up north where he is. And I think that's a great topic. We'll come back to that with him. I think we're talking with him first thing next week. So if you talk with him before then, please do echo our eagerness to kind of share all of these use cases across the standards. Was there another hand or another comment? I see bubbles in the lower right corner there, but I never know what's a hand and what's a comment pop up. Okay, I see John. Hi, thank you for also echoing the IA and UX stuff. I don't know if you have any other thoughts you want to add, but
I think the main thought is University of Oklahoma and Open Laws have been working on something similar. Damien knows about this, but yeah, just want to reiterate that we're happy to pitch in as a team, and we're doing the same thing. We might as well join forces. And I think Damien said, get the Avengers together.
Yes, happy to have you join the Avengers.
Thank you. So we're about 90 seconds from official time. I know some of you are joining from fairly late over the pond, if you will. But we can stay on and we can talk about stuff. I have another 30 minutes at least. So if we have other topics that are pressing, or if there's more open QA, which I did promise on the agenda we'd have open Q&A. We obviously did much of it probably as we went, but I want to make sure people have any questions that they have about what's happening answered, feel good about what's happening, are excited about either what is happening or their own ability to contribute and collaborate with us. But if you already all feel that way, then I don't need to keep blabbering at you on a Friday afternoon.
I want to express before we close my gratitude for everybody for joining. This is I see all of the attendees. These are some of the smartest people in legal tech. And so the thing, when I joined the taxonomical revolution in 2020, so 4 years ago, mostly I try to surround myself with people far smarter than me, and the people attending this are far smarter than me. And I'm just grateful for you all to contribute to what I think is going to be something very cool.
I agree, other than the part that everybody's smarter than Damien. It is great to see so many faces, so many names, so many people that I know have a lot to offer, or just are people that we want to spend time with. So,
And thank you both.
So
Well,
on
I'll
that
just
note,
say
go ahead.
No, I just wanted to join in and say I think this this endeavor is terrific. I'm really happy to see all of you people collaborating, and I'd like to follow it and join in to the extent I can. Thank you.
And maybe we'll finally get LLD for real here. Wouldn't that be nice?
Well, I was just going to say, so my longtime dream project was I want to parse statutes into my language for legal discourse. And I think with large language models, we can do that now. I'd love to see that. Although it's very ambitious, but you can start with some, it can start with some, you know, small proof of concept kinds of things. And I've done some, you know, toy demonstrations myself in the past. But I think we can do it to scale now. I'd like to see that.
Yeah, and more than just the French tax code too, right?
And for those who don't know Thorn, Thorn is a legend in this industry. He just received an award from Stanford at the Codex conference for his lifetime achievement. So yes, achieving LD is something that I would love to see too.
Thanks, Damien.
All right, well, the slides, it's not PowerPoint, it's Google Slides, will be available attached to the meeting invite and on the site. Recording will be available. Obviously, if you have any other questions or ideas, you know where to find us in multiple ways on the forum or email or everything. And I don't know when the next meeting will be, but I hope we'll all be in touch, and it will be sooner than later, and hopefully we'll all have more to share and show and do. So thank you, everyone. Have a good Friday.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.